Well, like, so I've seen a few channels that I'm sub to on YouTube earlier on making reference to this news piece, or at least the same story, but they might have been from different articles. I don't know. But regardless, out of interest, I decided to go and have a look for myself. And I'm not exactly somebody who's very big on polls in terms of, I don't particularly find them to be all that valid. In terms of if you did the same poll the next day, it would really just depend on who decided to participate. You might get a bit of a deviation from your previous figures, and then you just need to look no further than the SNP's crybaby routine during the EU debacle back in the day, where poll after poll after poll, every time there was a poll going in their favour, they clung to it. But when push came to shove, it didn't really mean fuck all in the grand scheme of things. But yeah, anyway, that said, I obviously do have an interest in this particular topic. And on top of that, this is also the second poll that's come out in recent months. Well, I think the last one that came out prior to this one now was last year, but it sort of showed a similar pattern. But again, wouldn't read too much into it. But I think it's safe to say before I go through this at all that in time, I think it's going to become an organic thing anyway, that you will begin to see an increase in opposition to immigration, because there is parts of Scotland that are already somewhat unrecognisable, and albeit they might not necessarily be as bad as parts of Birmingham and London, but when you go down to Glasgow, Paisley and whatnot in particular, I find it somewhat unnerving, In the next 20, 30 years, it probably will be spot the white man in certain parts of the country down now. So naturally you're going to see pushback to these types of things, There's obviously the other side of the argument. I get that there is parts of the country that are seeing a decline in births. Well, the whole country is, but in terms of young people are leaving, like the islands and certain parts of the countryside, the highlands and whatnot, all moving towards the cities, leaving their towns or their villages devoid of people to employ. So there is obviously some arguments to be made to try and get people to move there, but that doesn't mean that the border should be wide fucking open. And if people like John Swinney had their way, most certainly would be, And it does make you think as well on a side note I'm rambling now, but I could talk for hours on this and I have indeed done so. But it's like, even though Scotland takes in a very, very, very pitiful percentage of the overall annual amount of immigration that enters the UK annually, it's still been enough over the last 20 years or so to turn parts of the country unrecognisable, because part of the reason for that is Scotland's population is astronomically smaller than England and whatnot. So it would take half the time to start to transform the country. I just think it's somewhat idiotic, moronic, and I would argue malevolent to sit there and try and advocate for just an open border policy or a tailored migration approach, because you're not thinking of the long-term ramifications for what it means for us as a people. So, of course, when I see a wee poll like this, I'm intrigued, but, I don't read too much into it per se, as I said. Anyway, so this is from the Times. Scottish voters oppose John Slippery Swinney's immigration boost, but they're going on to say that the desire that he claims he has to boost immigration into Scotland is opposed by a majority of voters, with more than a third calling for the influx to be reduced, a poll has confirmed. More than 3/4, 77% of the voters in Scotland said they wanted immigration to decrease or to continue at current levels. The Norstat poll for the Times and the Sunday Times found with only 23% saying that they wanted immigration to increase, against 34% seeking a decrease, in a blow for the Rainbow Unicorn Party's demand for power over immigration. So there's a wee snapshot of it here. Obviously, the biggest percentage there really, though, is the one that says neither increase nor decrease. Then you've got some fucking crackpots that want a major increase. And some of them, of course, are probably some of the people that I mentioned that like live in the islands or whatever. But by and large, it's not exactly anything to totally write home about, So I was a bit perplexed when I seen the videos earlier on from these guys, but whatever. Still, sample size was just over 1,000 people, and there was survey between the 11th of January to the 14th of this year. The latest poll confirms the findings of Migration Policy Scotland in February from last year, which found 42% of Scots backed reduced immigration, with 31% backing an increase. That's this here, I'm not mistaken. I do remember seeing this last year. Scots cooling immigration is 4 in 10 want numbers cut. And then, of course, they use a photo. These guys, you don't need me to tell you this, but these guys are just fucking bellends with their pre-printed, stupid, cringy little posters that they all walk about with. Just because you oppose immigration doesn't make you a fucking racist, okay? This is just this is what they're like. It's fucking retarded. But anyway, then it says Scottish support for immigration. Bear in mind, this is last year's one. Scotland's support for immigration has cooled over the last year, according to the latest specialist survey on the topic. Some 42% of people north of the border now want to reduce the flow of migrants, up from 28% from the following year. That's quite a big jump, though, to be fair. So they must be referring to 2023. So it's gone from 28% to 42%. But again, it's just a snapshot in time from a poll. But regardless, big jump. The number of people wanting to clamp down the number of migrants entering the country has grown as a result of heightened rhetoric about reducing immigration from both main UK parties. You know, even that, it's like they've always got excuses for why people start to formulate these opinions. Has people never noticed this? That whether it's the mainstream media or whether it's activists or whether it's politicians or experts, quote unquote, they speak on your behalf all the fucking time. You're not allowed to formulate your own opinion in relation to your views on immigration. There has to be a reason for why you feel that way, you know? Because that's the only way that they can explain away why you don't feel the way that they feel, which is to just open the borders. So they blame UK parties and their rhetoric. That's why people are changing their views and their opinions. Or maybe it's just because they can see certain parts of England and they think, fuck that, I don't want that for my children. Or maybe they live in parts of Scotland where it's starting to replicate certain parts of England and they're thinking, fuck that, I don't want that for my children. Oh no, it can't be anything like that because up here we're all progressive. It must be the fault of misinformation and or bigoted rhetoric via the far right, aka Nigel Farage, etc. Anyway, it says, just stuff that annoys me. Migration Policy Scotland, the think tank which carried out the survey, stressed that majority of people still backed immigration at current levels or above. Okay, so there's the graph there. Reduced, increased a lot. Jesus, it's good to see that the increased a lot went down now, from 10 to 6, but remain the same as is, and reduced a little, blah blah blah. I mean, there is that question. There's parts of Scotland where immigration is obviously occurring, but the numbers are, as I said, pitiful in certain parts of the country anyway, in comparison to not just other parts of Scotland, but the rest of the UK overall. So I think it will take a lot longer for an organic shift in overall opinion to occur, but it will happen in time, without question. But the reason I bring that up is because I think that's why it's sort of similar in relation to what most people overall are like. Just keep it as it is, I would say anyway. Sarah Kayambi, the organisation's director, again, this is still last year's article, said that the Scottish authorities, fearing depopulation, were making different noises. So this is where it starts to get malevolent, as far as I'm concerned. This is where red flags should realistically be waving high above for most people. But for the time being, it's never really considered. And what I mean by that is, talking about depopulation in the same conversation as immigration or attitudes towards immigration or requiring devolved immigration powers. These are two things that should not be going hand in hand, at least right off the jump anyway. That should not be the go-to solution. But this is the conversation. And it's been the conversation for as long as I have ever paid attention to politics. Writing in the Times, she said, Scotland's new First Minister has called for more immigration to stimulate economic growth. Yeah. New research from Migration Policy Scotland indicates that John Swinney's view is better aligned with what the Scottish public want. Historically, high net migration figures could be interpreted as signalling time for greater restrictiveness, and this representative survey does not find that Scottish views have cooled over the past 12 months, yet the research also shows a clear, if cautious, pragmatism on immigration. I mean, what the fuck? Despite the fact the entirety of the article is talking about how it's jumped up from the year prior. Anyway, in your opinion, what percentage of the total Scottish population are immigrants? Oh, yeah, because they make reference here. No, sorry. Yeah, 6 to 10%. Yeah, yeah, okay. The survey found more than half of respondents overestimated this proportion, meaning how many like immigrants we have in the country. In your opinion, what percentage of the total population is immigrant? And people put 6 to 10%. Not that fucking far off, were they? To be fair, it's like 96% white at the time. So, anyway, Migration Policy Scotland noted that ignorance about the actual numbers meant attitudes to immigration should be treated with caution. But see, even that, I feel compelled to try and pull apart here. Because at the end of the day, if people perceive the number to be higher, that indicates that when the number ends up being that in time organically, they're going to have those fucking beliefs when the time comes. Does that not, in and of itself, showcase to you that people don't, well, the people that we're speaking about here anyway, who overestimated the figures, they might be incorrect right now, but in time they will be correct. And then when that time comes, they'll still have these beliefs. You know? But hell, what do I know? I must just be a bigot. However, it did find that 25% of respondents wanted immigration reduced substantially, and another 70% by a little. 10% wanted immigration increased a lot, and 21% by a little. The think tank also discovers significant differences in attitudes between supporters of different parties. Right? I don't really give a shit about stuff like that. In all honesty, apart from to laugh at the fact when it comes away with stuff like this, Scottish nationalists at 48% are the most likely to back increased immigration, thus rendering them no longer nationalist. That makes no fucking sense. But don't let that stop you. It's just, I don't understand the media in this country, the way that they refer to these pricks. They're about as nationalistic. I'm finished that sentence. Scots remain more pro-immigration than the UK average. However, the gap is indeed narrowing, right? Which brings me back, obviously, to the initial article, the one from just a few days ago. So it says a support for a cut in immigration is strongest among Reform UK voters and people over 35. And then goes on to talk about Conservative, blah, 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 SNP and Liberal Democrat voters back their eyes on migration rather than the cut of caught because they're so nationalistic. Yeah. And then, of course, they have to, again, they've always got fucking, got to throw in Nigel Farage here, right? The result echoes the wider findings of the poll, which found Reform UK is taking more votes than Labour, from Labour than the Tories is. In Scotland, Nigel Farage's anti-immigration party was backed by 12% of respondents, just 1 point behind the Tories and 4 behind Labour. The SNP seeks full power over migration policy through independence, which the party says would allow the Scottish Government to build asylum and immigration systems geared to meet Scotland's needs and founded on fairness and human rights. Now, I have lost count of how many times I've heard this fucking dribble from this wankery party that are sadly still in charge after all these years. But the reality of the matter is pretty simple when it comes to pulling apart their bullshit. And what puzzles me the most is so many of my fellow Scotsmen still can't see it. First and foremost, we should focus on the more odious part of that little statement. Human rights and fairness. Yes, human rights and fairness. What the fuck does that mean? Well, they tried to insinuate that there's a hostile environment, despite the fact the borders are practically wide open for the entirety of the UK, whether they're coming in illegally or otherwise. Okay, So when you take that into account, they would have to do the opposite of that, because we wouldn't be wanting a hostile environment here, would we? No. So they're going to practically, it would be the open border policy on steroids, and human rights. Everything's about human rights, dignity, fairness, and all that crap. So it would practically just be a free pass for whoever wanted to come into the country. I can't see how it could be anything else. Human rights. The fact that they don't even have control yet, and they're making references to human rights, which has been the biggest thorn, allegedly, in the side of the UK post allegedly leaving the EU. Human rights. Well, I love their human rights here in Rainbow Unicorn Land. And as for building an asylum and immigration system geared to meet our needs, you've never fucking asked us what we want overall. And on top of that, because what they're technically are advocating for could in turn lead to, as seen, our country resemble certain parts of England. There's that. But, when it comes to the other elephant in the room here, which never gets addressed by people who continuously listen to what John Swinney and the gang have to say when they're not waving rainbow flags and pretending to be nationalists, right? And that is that ever since we were part of the European Union as a member of the UK back in the day when we had access to free movement of people, right? Yeah. Look at all the immigration that poured into the UK through all of those years. And guess where the vast, vast majority of them all went? That's right. They went to fucking England, which sucks for them. However, they can't explain that one. So they just blame Brexit for it. Oh, it's Brexit's fault. Before Brexit, we had so many coming in. No, we didn't, did we? Because you were complaining about needing devolved immigration power before we left the fucking EU. So shut up. Oh, it's just so annoying. And anyway, come down here a bit because I start yammering on about other shit. Polling on immigration in Scotland was sparse and inconsistent before the migration policy started tracking attitudes in 2023. In its first paper, it was billed as the first representative survey of attitudes to immigration since 2014, when Scots were even more resistant to immigration, with 57% of people surveyed backing a reduction against 10% in favour of a rise. Scottish ministers seized on the first results of the survey when they were published in 2023. It found Scots were broadly in favour of immigration, with 38% backing a rise against 28% demanding a cut. The government swiftly launched a paper 2 months later. I don't remember this fucking nonsense. I remember this nonsense. They launched a paper entitled Migration to Scotland After Independence. It found that Migration Policy Scotland's findings indicated high levels of support in Scotland for a modest increase in immigration and a lower appetite in Scotland for reducing immigration than it is apparent in the UK-wide data. They then, however, were silent when a follow-up report in February of 2024 found the position had dramatically reversed. 40% of Scots backing reduced immigration and a slight decline in those backing an increase. It's just funny because this is what the SNP do. That's what I was on about at the start of this wee video here. That's what they're doing. Every time a poll came out that gave them a slight edge when it came to more independence, they were all over it. But when one came out that, went the other way, they were all quiet on that one. Standard craft, isn't it? Anti-immigrant sentiment is stronger across the UK, with 52% backing a decline against 16% backing an increase. But the shift in support in Scotland chimes with recent UK-wide data, which shows a similar trend, as well as rising salience of immigration as an issue of concern, migration policy said. And actually, across the UK, in particular England, there's going to be slightly higher anti-immigration sentiment. And I would go so far as to probably say a good portion, maybe not all, but a good portion of people who are ever surveyed in these things who are in favour of it down there are probably fucking immigrants or descendants of anyway. There was a couple other articles on this. If I can find it. But I don't think it really matters. Just leave off with this one. This is obviously the SNP's policy on immigration from their website. Scotland needs an immigration policy suited to our specific circumstances and needs. Scotland needs people to want to work here, but this is the point, John. It's the point, Johnny boy. There's nothing fucking stopping them from coming here. They just don't want to. Could be the tax. I don't know. Could be because it's slowly turning into a shithole. I don't know. But as I said, for years and years and years, when we had the ability to exploit freedom of movement, they still weren't able to attract anywhere near the numbers that they claimed that they'd acquired. They always have a scapegoat, though, eh? The current UK one-size-fits-all approach to immigration is failing Scotland. Again, I don't understand how that's possible. It's like they can move here if they wanted to, they just don't. UK immigration policies do not take into account Scotland's unique circumstances, and they are harmful to our communities and future prosperity. Tell you what's also going to be harmful to our communities and future prosperity. Not even addressing the elephants in the room in relation to what you're advocating for here. Why is the discussion completely off the table when it comes to what this would mean long term? Are we supposed to just accept the fact that we're dying out? Because that's what this is really all about at the end of the day. We're dying out. Slowly. Won't happen in my lifetime. Might not even happen in my son's lifetime. But it's going to happen. You know? The trends don't lie. The maths don't lie. We're on the decline. And we're just to accept it and cry and whine for open borders, with not two fucks given about what the implications could mean long term for us. That's the modus operandi of our Scottish Nationalist Party, though, isn't it? Anyway, signing off. Bye-bye.